You know what? No, I'm not gonna do that. For once, I'm gonna be better than that. I won't make ridiculously big sacrifices for extremely short-term gains. I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna read this book. At least it wasn't me this time. Hello Clicktoomblers, and welcome to the end of reality, and more importantly, the cookie clicker lore. Because having the fabric of reality undone before my very eyes is no excuse to slack around. On top of that, you can only learn the lore of Cookie Clicker once, and this is my 57th reality destruction? No, wait, 58th. I forgot that one time with a blender. So, let's dive in. It all begins with, also known as insert name here in square brackets. Indeed, the protagonist seems to not have a defined name. Less experienced lore professors would say such things as, yeah, it's supposed to be a self-insert. Also, how did you get in here? But I am not tricked by such deceit. This is the first display of the power our protagonist will achieve. They use this power to delete their name from existence, to try and conceal their identity. So all we're left with is a blank space filled by a randomly generated name to trick you into letting it steal your name. Fortunately, I have the perfect thing for this. Joe. A name so boring and lame that no one would ever want to steal it. So anyways, as I was saying, this all started when Joe decided to bake some cookies, just for fun. And as they pulled their first ever batch out of the oven, Joe felt something within them change. They felt ever so slightly stronger, their senses ever so slightly more aware. Unfortunately, no one was interested in eating Joe's cookies, not even their family. And when they were thrown out, even the animals avoided them. But it didn't matter to Joe. They wanted to feel that strange sensation again. And so they baked, and eventually they found that they could automate the process. And although slow, it did create a constant trickle of cookies. This is what the cursors signify. How exactly Joe automated baking using cursors? I don't quite know. Perhaps this is the first display of their newfound abilities, or some technological advancement. Regardless of how the cursors exactly worked, they helped Joe ramp up their operations. They baked 50, 100, 500 cookies, finally convincing their family to try them, their friends to try them, their neighbors to try them. Slowly, more and more people were becoming aware of Joe's cookies, which made what happened next inevitable. The arrival of the grandma. It is the villain, or perhaps the anti-hero. But that won't matter right now. Right now, it was just the next step on Joe's path. By employing grandmas, Joe could scale up their operation significantly at an extremely low price. What a horrific monster. How could one do such a thing? And could it be described to me in great detail? I know a place where it would be terrible if this happened. Oh, right, reality is ending. Never mind then. Not that I would do something like that. Moving on, the grandmas would eventually become Joe's worst mistake. But for now, it played its role and helped Joe reach new heights of popularity and power. With every cookie baked, Joe's power grew. But they realized that baking cookies wasn't enough. It just wouldn't scale up fast enough. And so Joe used their newfound power over reality and created cookie seeds, which when planted would eventually grow into a cookie plant that could be harvested for more cookies. But that wasn't enough for Joe. They wanted even more cookies, and so they decided to turn everything from the ground they stood on to the core of the planet into a cookie so it could be mined and turned into more cookies. Joe hadn't even reached 100,000 cookies baked, and already the fabric of reality was at their fingertips. Who knows what they would be capable of at 1 million, 1 billion, 1 trillion cookies? Joe was dead set on finding out, so they came up with another heinous idea. A building filled with contraptions and workers, each paid only a minuscule fraction of what their work was worth. Joe called this a factory, and it would be used to turn all the resources from the farms and the mines into more cookies faster. What started as a simple way to pass the time now had turned into an empire of cookies. An empire Joe had no intention to stop expanding. They had even stopped baking long ago. After all, their time was better spent trying to find new ways to grow the empire, and in that search, they found an unconventional answer: currency. Everyone kept talking about dollars, euro, yen, whatever, and they all said, money is power. But they were wrong. Cookies. Cookies are power. And so Joe sought to right this wrong. It's unclear if they used their powers or simple political connections. What matters is that they made cookies the universal currency and immediately began buying up every bank they could lay their hands on. By trading on the open cookie market, they all accumulated cookie interest that bolstered Joe's reserves greatly. It was at this point that they were informed by an unknown contact of the existence of a temple in the middle of the Amazonian jungle. Who knows what Joe could have offered this unknown but certainly handsome contact for this information. Whatever the price was, it was worth it. Because inside this temple, Joe found artifacts that confirmed the history of cookies as objects of power. They also found tablets depicting the Great 11 cookie gods and instructions on how to obtain their blessings. You would imagine Joe to be interested in this, excited, maybe even considering praying to these gods. But they weren't. All they could feel is rage. The only god of cookies was them, and they would show these so-called gods the true meaning of power in due time. But for now, Joe decided to use this as yet another opportunity for expansion. By using their powers, they could easily build a new religion centered on cookies. And even though Joe despised the gods, they could still make use of their blessings by sacrificing some of their most devoted followers. By this point, there were very few places Joe's cookies hadn't reached. They had even infiltrated the secret wizard community under every Burger King, which is how Joe discovered their existence and immediately found a place for them in the Cookie Empire. They would be allowed to exist in the outside world, at the cost of using their magic to make more cookies for Joe. On top of that, even though their magic was no match for Joe's reality warping abilities, they still found ways to use it to help with the efficiency of the Empire, which by this point had fully engulfed the planet. As a matter of fact, Joe found the constraints of one planet far too limiting, and so began research into advanced space travel so that they could access more worlds to colonize in order to boost their cookie production. But they didn't have to research for long. The allure of Joe's cookies had reached intergalactic levels. Aliens from the planet Zeblor 5 offered to give Joe access to their technology in exchange for a constant supply of cookies to their homeworld. Joe immediately took this deal, and with the technology they built the Intergalactic Cookie Shipping Company, breaking free from the constraints that a single planet imposed on them. But that wasn't all. Joe had an idea to bolster cookie production even further. So they took their private spaceship over to a barren planet in a barren solar system and got out. Even a year ago, standing on an alien planet would have shaken their world. But Joe felt nothing as they stepped off their ship. This planet had nothing to offer of its own. No flora, no fauna, no resources, not even an atmosphere. Something Joe failed to notice, but it mattered little. They had stopped needing oxygen a couple billion cookies back. It was time to do what they were there for. With a snap of their fingers, the entire planet was transformed into a cookie, with an atmosphere barely survivable to facilitate the extraction of cookies, but not tempt anyone into settling permanently on it. During the return trip, they were informed of the new developments. Their scientists had found a way to combine science and magic, allowing them to turn gold into cookie, creating yet another production line for the Empire. This news should have enthused them. More cookies, more power. But Joe felt nothing. Was this really it? Had they conquered all they could? Yeah, they could get more cookie planets, but would that satisfy them? These were the thoughts that swirled in their mind as they arrived back on Earth. Joe decided to take a walk, to clear their head of these thoughts. And by wandering, they arrived at a familiar place. Be it good fortune or destiny, Joe found themselves in the alley where they threw their first batch, all that time ago. Back when things were simpler. They didn't yet know how far this cookie thing would go. As a matter of fact, back then, they didn't even think to keep their first ever cookie as a keepsake. And it was as this thought reverberated in Joe's head that they saw it. A single cookie, perfectly preserved as if it just came out of the oven. Joe could feel it. This was it. Their first cookie. Had it called them here? As Joe held it in their hands, they felt an odd impulse to break it, snap it in half, and watch it crumble. And when they did, Joe witnessed the end. The end of everything. Their entire reality vanished, and everything they had built, everything they had achieved, was gone. I can't even imagine how that feels. Oh, right. I actually can imagine how it feels. Pretty well now that I think about it. But what now? Joe found themselves in the void between realities, having lost everything. Completely alone, except for a single blob of cookie dough? Which called to them like their first cookie did. Joe knew what they had to do. They started to bake it. And as they did, Joe found that what they were really doing was baking a new reality that Joe could shape in their image. And that they did, recreating the reality they came from, but before the cookie empire got out of hand. And just like that, with no fanfare, they were back. At ground zero, but far, far stronger. Joe could have stopped. They could have walked away and been satisfied with the powers they had gained, but they didn't. They were going to see just how far they could push this thing. And so the empire was rebuilt. And now, with their newfound knowledge of the structure of reality, Joe found a new avenue for expansion. Other realities. By invading other realities, they could harvest cookies from the infinite multiverse, and eventually, they would also learn of a way to consume entire realities to obtain cookies. Hopefully, an idea so abhorrent that even Joe wouldn't put it into practice. Joe had now fully mastered space, but there was a whole other axis they had yet to move in, yet to exploit: time. Joe successfully created time machines to be used to bring in cookies from the past and the future. Now they had done it. All matter, in all realities, and even in time itself was being used to bake cookies. They had achieved a level of power that outranked any god, but Joe wasn't satisfied. They wanted more. Sure, all matter is being converted into cookies, but what about antimatter? And so they created antimatter condensers to convert all the antimatter in the universe into cookies. But it still wasn't enough. From here on, Joe's future endeavors would focus on converting anything and everything into cookies. Light, done. Luck, easy. Cookies themselves, through fractal reconstruction, it was done. Joe was truly immersed in this work. They were determined to see their cookie empire reach levels they never thought possible. And the instant that a reality grew too slow for them, they knew what to do. Joe barely paid attention to anything that wasn't ways to expand their cookie empire. So it's no surprise that the researches of the grandmas went unnoticed. Joe signed off on them, barely looking at how much they would improve their cookie yield. But they would end up regretting this carelessness. The grandmas had also been aware of the power of cookies, and it also sought to use them to bolster its strength. Now I can finally address the it in the room, as with the purchase of the One Mind research, the grandmas revealed its true form, and I can reveal to you why I address the grandmas as an it. You see, these aren't sweet old ladies, not anymore at least. They are all part of the great old one. It is an elder god, a hive mind that infected old human women because of their proximity to cookies and sought to use them to reach the same goal Joe had been after this whole time. If Joe had been more careful or paid more attention to the grandmas, this could have been avoided. But now that it was awake, there would be no going back. Giant monsters named Wrinklers started appearing out of nowhere, seeking to consume all the cookies that Joe had destroyed so much for. This they could not allow, and so battles raged between two gods across all reality and all time. Two gods of equal strength with equal goals. Both sought to use the cookies to bolster themselves. Both thought themselves the righteous and the other the abomination. Both cared very little for the lives lost in this conflict. but only one had the key to ending this war. Joe knew that if they remade reality, they could at least stop the Great Old One from having access to a physical manifestation. And so, with all other options expended, Joe had to give in and accept that this was a battle they could not win. And after it was done, Joe finally felt some relief. But they knew that the Great Old One was still out there, and its power was still growing. All Joe could do is deny it a physical form, as they continued to push further and further. Their next push came as a part of a realization, one that was inevitable as their power kept increasing. Joe realized that the world they inhabited was a simulation, part of a game named Cookie Clicker. They also realized that they had grown powerful enough to leave if they so chose to. But Joe had no reason to leave. The cookies that granted them so much power were made here. If anything, they could use the fact that their simulation ran on JavaScript to create more cookies. And that wasn't all. Joe also learned of the existence of other so-called idle games, all centered around producing large amounts of various items. None of them seemingly contained a being quite like Joe or the Great Old One, however. And that made them easily exploitable. Joe brought them all into their world, and simply converted whatever it was they produced into cookies. Was this finally truly all? Joe had breached the fourth wall and plundered what lay beyond for more cookies. Was there truly nothing left after this? Joe thought. If they could imagine a cookie and picture it in their mind's eye, why couldn't thought itself be harvested and turned into cookies? And so Joe created planet-sized sentient brains that would have their thoughts harvested and converted into cookies. After the first Cortex baker went into operation, Joe decided to eat the first cookie it created in celebration for this accomplishment. And this got them thinking, how long had it been since they last ate a cookie? It must have been a millennia. Not that time meant anything anyway for a being such as Joe, but still, it made them pause and think. How long had it been since they did anything that wasn't finding new avenues for the Empire to expand? That was even longer. From before they baked that first batch, before they felt that feeling, before they knew what power was. Power. What good is power if you're too busy to use it? Joe had so much they wanted to do with said power, so many gods to kill, so many realities to devour, but doing that would mean not being able to work on expanding the empire further, and they stopped believing that the worlds to conquer would end a long time ago. There would be no end for how far the Cookie Empire could reach. But what then? Would they have to choose? Joe refused the idea. A god does not choose. They would do both or they would do neither. And so Joe started to look for some kind of solution. And as always, they found one. They would simply clone themselves, give the clones a fraction of their power, and let them handle the empire, leaving Joe free to do whatever they please. And although anticlimactic, this is where the known story ends. It isn't known where Joe went or what they did. Their clones settled nicely as the administrators of the empire, and it is said that to this day they're still trying to find more ways to produce cookies. Well, that was the entire lore of Cookie Clicker, thus far. Well, it's time for some closing remark. Wait, I feel like I'm forgetting something. Oh, right, end of reality. Sorry, the Cookie Clicker lore was just too interesting. I kept forgetting. Ah, well, I'm sure that can wait a little bit longer. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe, like, and comment what your favorite way of making cookies is. Me, personally, I